Next up, first for the afternoon, we have Ryan Chapman with implementing a kickbutt training program, Blue Team Go.
Am I good? There we go. Hey folks, how's it going today? You good? Everyone's good? You're not too tired after lunch, like lagging, gonna fall asleep, right? Right? Everyone's all right? All right, good deal. So my name is Ryan Chapman, and we're here to talk about essentially this 5-week training course that I put together. I was a trainer for, I don't know, almost like 6 years, like a technical trainer, corporate trainer. And I do incident response now. Been doing it for about 6 years, but enough about me. You don't care about that. So, why baseline training? Here's our agenda. No one even cares about the agendas either, but there's 2 items in bold that are very important here. One of them is the core tenets of the program. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm moving around a lot, my bad. I can already see the camera guys like, come on, fool. So the core tenets of the program and then the 5 different phases are basically the 5 different weeks, and we're gonna talk about how they're designed, why they were designed that way. They're modular, you can kind of move them around, and they're flexible, and blah, 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 blah. So, here's a little bit about me. I absolutely love retro gaming. Anyone here like a retro gamer? Huh? Look there's a picture of a power glove. I'm using a power glove. How cute is that? So, at one point, I have a problem with collecting. At one point, I actually had 5 Sega Dreamcasts, 5 of them. And I thought that was a bit daffy. So I sold 2 of them, and now I only have 3. And that's just far more logical, right? To still have 3? I don't know why, but yeah. I also, how do you know if someone does CrossFit, they're a doctor, or in this case, they do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? They'll tell you. Or they'll include a picture in all their damn presentations. Right? So there's me getting choked out. I still get choked out pretty bad. I'm actually not very good, but I love it. So, yeah, no, enough about me. This is an 80s retro gaming themed conference, right? So I was like, the power glove. I figured everyone was going to play on that movie Kung Fury. Have you watched Kung Fury, right? And so I had like a Hacker Man shirt that I was going to wear, and he wears this in the movie, and I was like, wait a minute, I know what I can do. So I modified it, and I basically just pulled it apart, took all the stuff out, and I put a little presenter remote in it, and now I can just go boop, boop. How great is that? And I enjoyed that a little too much. So why baseline training? First off, anyone here, it's supposed to be participation, right, back and forth. Anyone here, throw your hands up if you are actively on a blue team now, or you have a blue team at your place of employment. Okay, how many times will a blue teamer come in and know exactly how to do the job that you want him or her to do? It's extremely rare. There's so many different frameworks you could follow. There's so many different methodologies and ways to approach a blue team, the defense side of things. You can't just pull someone in off the streets, so to say. Educational institutions and certifications are typically rote memorization. You pull these folks in and they're like, oh, I've seen this content. Oh, I've got 6 different certifications. And you're like, okay, that's fantastic. How many bits are in a byte? And they're like, what? I don't know. There's been so many people who have come into our place with graduate degrees, with forensic analysis, graduate degrees, and the building block basics, they just don't know them. So that's part of why we designed this at my quote-unquote day job, but I'm not here from day jobs, so let's just move on. So the goal for this is that red teamers, when you hire red teamers, typically they come with all these varied backgrounds, right? You might have one gal whose primary focus is just web application firewalls, and she could pwn the heck out of those things, right? And typically what red teams do is they hire a diverse set of people. Blue teams, a lot of times, is they try to do that, but then they don't ensure that every time they're responding to an incident that the same steps are being taken to have kind of like a unified defense. So that's what we're trying to kind of get over. We're trying to fix that, essentially. So, speaking of which, we want to develop people who are jacks of all trades, Jacks and Jills of all trades. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, we don't have the personnel for that. We actually have to compartmentalize, if you will. Well, a problem with that is if you have just a defer team, and then you have a reversing team, and then you have the tier 1 or tier 2 triage responders, the problem you run into is, something comes in, it's a weaponized JavaScript file, a PDF with JavaScript, and they go, oh, I can't do that. I have to wait for so-and-so to come in. They work in 3 days. And meanwhile, that threat just lingers and just kind of hangs out and sits there in your network. And that could be a bad thing. So again, day job / what I really like to see is a responding group where everyone's capable. It doesn't matter what comes in. It doesn't matter what that ticket or that email or whatever it was comes in. They're able to handle it. Or someone on the shift is able to handle it, and then they kind of work in unison. So the goal is essentially not necessarily tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and capabilities matching that tiered group, but rather anyone there can handle the situation. A lot of times in security we have very few people, how many people here again with your blue teamers? How many have more than 5 people? I saw a couple hands. All right, cool. So most folks don't. They have 1 or 2 people sometimes, so having a varied skill set is very important. All right, to start off, you're going to have some type of subject matter expert or a trainer to train the trainers. So if anyone wants to start looking into this, there's a program, I forgot the name of it. It used to be ASTD, now it's ATD. It's a technical training organization. They certify trainers. And one of the things they talk about is a T3 session where you train the trainers. So if you have SMEs like from reverse engineering, host-based forensics, network forensics, or what have you, then those people would be the ones who are training your trainers, and the trainers will then be training the analysts or so on and so forth. All right, core tenets. This is the really important stuff right here, okay? We want people to understand the how and why behind what they're doing. Too many times we have people who can basically, like a technician, right? I don't mean to bang on Geek Squad, but just the name came up, right? They may know how to replace an FRU, a field replaceable unit, but they have no idea how that actually fixed the problem. Their program might say like, hey, pop in a new graphics card. And they go, okay. And they put a new one in, and they're like, problem solved, right? Well, what was the problem? We want our techs and our analysts, especially our responders, to actually know why. So we don't want silly monkeys hitting buttons and getting bananas, all right? We want intelligent monkeys. Look at that guy. He's got an idea, right? So this is what we want. We want people to understand how to do things, and they typically learn it through experiential training. Who here listened to the keynote yesterday? Hands, right? Rachel, I believe is her first name, right? Rachel Toback. She was talking about how she doesn't learn something unless she actually does it, hands-on does it. And those of you who may be familiar with Malcolm Gladwell and his 10,000 hours concept, I'm not talking about doing instant response for 10,000 hours, but the idea is the more you do it, you're going to understand it a lot better. So, boop. We want to foster a go here to find the answer mentality. We have a lot of people who become dependent on others, especially when they come into a tiered infrastructure or team, if you do happen to have one. And the tier ones are typically like, well, how do I do this? Where do I go to get the answer? They don't ask, where do I go to get the answer? They ask, what's the answer? And they become reliant on that capability. Well, we don't want that. We want them to know where to go to get that answer, be it internal or be it external. A good example of which, RFCs. This is not meant for you to read the text. Don't worry. I know it's all small. Don't worry about that. But this is an RFC for HTTP, the protocol. So understanding the protocol at a lower level, at the very least, you need to understand response codes, right? What's a GET request? What's a POST request? When you're initiating an SSL connection, why do you get a CONNECT request? What's the purpose of all that? What are the response codes that come back? As opposed to answering a question when someone says, what's a 303? And you go, oh, that's a, you get all happy and you're like, oh, I'll tell you. No. Be like, go over here. There's an entire list of them. They're all there, right? So we want them to give them the tools to answer their own questions going forward. If you have your own knowledge management system, a glorified wiki, basically, if you have a wiki, whatever, and you point them to the articles, it's over there. Go find it over there. And then they find the answers themselves, hopefully, going forward. All right, different types of learners come into play. Apparently, this is now debated. Some people say this is bunk. Well, it worked for me for years, so whatever. There are visual cues that people will give the trainer, typically, that kind of show how they learn best. Kinesthetic learners, they learn by doing, and often when you ask them a question, they will literally look down, and they're trying to visualize themselves performing that particular action or activity. If you notice that in a training course, or whoever's doing the training that you pick up off the idea here, whoever's noticing that can kind of give them assignments or tasks that involved actually doing. Auditory learners will typically look to the sides. And in fact, there's a guy, hey, Art, where are you? Hey, got a guy back there that I work with, and whenever I tell him something, if he really wants to say, what did you say to me? He'll kind of go like this, and he'll look at me, and I'm like, okay. We rephrase it again, and he'll be like, I got it. He's a really auditory learner, and I just kind of picked up on that whenever we're just communicating, going back and forth. So you also have your visual learner. Anyone here look up when you're thinking? A lot of people are visual learners and look up. So depending on what type of learner the person is, and you can identify just with their visual cues, you give them tasks and assignments within the training sessions to kind of foster that, Someone who may be a kinesthetic learner or a visual learner, you start talking about having them draw diagrams on paper or showing them diagrams and having them replicate them, things of that nature. Everything should tie back to the real world. So whatever ticketing system you have, however you manage your incidents, whatever it is, you want to bring those up as examples. Let's just say, say you have Splunk, and you say, we have 147 different alerts that are active right now in Splunk. Okay, that's great. How many of them usually fire? What are the top 10? They're like, oh, these 6 fire all the time. Okay, use those. Use those as examples. Go over 2 of them each or something like that. And make sure that while you're doing that, you're also reviewing other people's work. Ticket review and shadowing are critical, especially because they serve as really good jump-off points for your training. So you're going through a ticket, and you're like, hey, remember we talked about DNS? Look, here's the actual query type right here in this PCAP. And they go, well, how come blah, 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 blah? And then you use that as a jump-off point and start taking notes on what you covered with that particular individual so you can cover it with the rest. Works really, really well. Shadowing is also indispensable if you have the personnel and capabilities and overlapping shifts to be able to do that. So the framework, I'm calling it a framework. It's really cute. I just came up with 5 different weeks of training, okay? You can do them all at You can do them all at one time. You can do a couple weeks here and then a couple weeks there, whatever. If you have someone who's brand new, the reason I'm calling it flexible is if you do all 5 weeks of training in a row, which includes host-based forensics and includes network forensics and includes reverse engineering of like .NET code and all that, it's going to be extremely overwhelming. So I don't really recommend that. All right, here are the 5 weeks. Here's the breakdown. Week 1 is intro, setup, and the SIEM. I'm not checking my email, by the way. I'm just checking my time real quick. That I never started. Cool. I never started that timer. Moving on. All right, so week 1. A lot of companies, HR will do like a half-hour session and say, hey, we're company X, we hired you because of whatever, and thanks for being along, and you get paid on these days, right? We're going to talk a little bit more detail on the next slide about actually introducing them truly to your team, the reason that that team exists. Why do you have a response capability? There's probably a very specific reason, by the way. Setup is going to take multiple days, right? Setting up the machine, setting up your VM, setting up your accounts, organizing all your passwords, all that other stuff. Those are the first couple days. Those are really boring. And then you end off the first week with your SIEM training. So how many folks here use a SIEM or have it at work? Just yell out the name of it. Splunk. I hear Splunk. I hear Splunk. Okay, we got Splunk. All right, so QRadar, ArcSight, whatever you folks are using. You want to introduce that to them in thorough detail. The team origin, was your team developed out of a reaction? Did you have a little bitty whoopsie in your network that you were responding to, right? I know some folks who have gone from 0 active continuous network monitoring analysts to having over 40 on a team. Obviously, they didn't just think like, oh, we should probably have a really big team for no reason, right? So what are the real threats your company faces and what caused the formation of that team? Why are they really there? What really brought them into your environment? And then for that matter, how is the team formed? We've had let me pull back for 1 second. Not at my place of business at all. I've heard of people working in this type of capacity on a SOC, for example, for years at a time, and then asking the question, what does NSM mean? And you're like, what? We have an NSM team. And they're like, oh, okay. You're like, what, dude? So how do the teams operate? What are their capabilities? What are their tool sets? And then how do they integrate? And that's all really important for them. And that can go back to the whole whiteboarding. With this type of training, you do a whiteboarding and you say, here's our tiered infrastructure and here's why it was set up this way. And then you erase it and the next day you point to, I don't know, whoever. You say, hey, you, go over there and draw it on the board. And they go, okay. And then they try it and then they mess it all up and they're like, I suck at that. And you're like, do it again, right? So you just kind of keep fostering that idea. Oh, the very bottom here. It's very important folks know your capabilities, what works well on your team. And although this is controversial, I stand by it 155,000%. The things that don't work well on your team, the issues that you have on your team, if you let people know about them up front, and of course a positive way, then they can help focus on those things as they're being integrated into the team to try to ease those things. Otherwise, if they're not aware of it, it could be the exact opposite. So your SIEM, what logs do you have available? Why do you have those logs? What's the duration of those logs? For you Splunk folks, how long do they stay in cold storage before they go to frozen storage? Like what do they have access to? And on top of that, what do they not have access to? That's critical. Say your company has packet captures, and you say, hey, we can get PCAPs. And they're like, oh, cool. Well, are you SSL offloading? And for that matter, how long do your PCAPs stay in play? Oh, we can pull PCAPs for up to 5 minutes. Okay, awesome. That's super useful, right? Whatever. So it's very important to let them know what they have access to and what they don't. And then your tickets. I don't know how many times, there's a lot. I'm from the Phoenix Valley, so technically I'm from the Bay Area, but I live in Phoenix now. We have a lot of security teams, but they're all very close-knit. So we kind of know each other's tools and things that they use on a daily basis, really. And there's so many times people come in and they're not even just taught the basics of like, hey, we would prefer that you document your tickets like this. Like use these types of code blocks or like put, we want this type of information or something. Like don't put ephemeral links because that's not going to help when we're doing ticket review a month later or something like that. So that's just critical to kind of get up front. And then again, using very common tickets as examples is super helpful. Okay, networking and forensics. Anyone here want to come up on stage and tell everyone exactly how DNS works? Exactly how DNS works. Anyone? I don't know how many, was there a hand over here? Maybe I missed. I don't know how many times someone's like, oh, I have a CCNA, I've got a freaking degree, I got a grad degree in networking. You're like, okay, how does DNS work? Well, you put the name in, and then it gives you an IP. Okay, well, how does that work? Well, it gives you an IP, stupid. You're like, no. All right, so actually understanding these things, the core fundamentals of those protocols is critical for their understanding, especially when it comes to response. The more data you provide them, like a PCAP, just a general PCAP of a freaking DNS query can like spin people's heads. So how do those work, those protocols? Your networking logs, do you have a Zeek environment? I hate that name. Bro, I'm gonna just call it Bro, right? Do you using Bro? What are you using for your log parsing, right? How are those being bucketized and dumped into your system? What do they look like? What format do they follow? Are they tab separated? Are they comma separated? Are they key value separated? Like, what do they look like, all right? And where can you go to get information on those damn logs? Email. And that, again, so many people are like, I've been triaging email for years now. And you're like, cool, what does it mean when a field starts with an X dash? And they're like, it's an X field. You're like, okay, what does that mean? Like, well, it's some stuff has X stuff. And you're like, okay, it's just an optional field, right? But why are those there? And what uses those? You know, what's a user agent? What's what do they call them? X-mailer, excuse me, an X-dash mailer. Why are those important? How can you use them for pivoting? Taking an example email with like 100 lines in the headers and just going bottom to top and be like, tell me everything you see. You'll notice a lot of newer hires, even with like a decent amount of SOC experience, will know like maybe a third of them. And that's being generous, by the way. And then we got Wireshark and PCAP, which is network forensics, coming up over here. DNS is my favorite. If you take away anything in this talk right now, except for the fact that the Power Glove is bad, and I really like these. Aside from that, you gotta take away the following. There's a video out there on YouTube. It's called A Cat Explains DNS. It's made by a fella named Nil Kitty. Phenomenal. The guy really knows his stuff. And so, he's eccentric, as you can tell, right? So you're looking at him, you're like, well, this guy's kind of a silly. He's really knowledgeable. So I show it in every class. It's like 15 minutes. It's phenomenal. But this goes to the example of asking your class, like, how does DNS work, right? And I'm going to be quick here because of time. I'm just going to give an example of some of the things that we cover, right? You pop in an email, domain name up in the address bar. What does your computer do? It looks at the local cache and it goes to the host file. If it doesn't do that, it reaches out to your DNS server. DNS server is most likely a local resolver. That local resolver, if it doesn't have the answer, is going to go where first? To the top level, the root domains, 13 of them, A through M, right? If they don't know the answer, they're not going to. It's going to send them over to the TLD domain. So if you're looking for like farts.com, it's going to go, I don't know where that is, go talk to the .com person, right? When it goes to the .com TLD, they're going to go like, oh, that's the authoritative server over there, go get the answer. When the answer comes back, they're going to get the A record, it's going to have a TTL, time to live. If those are very, very low and they repeat or change often, that could be something called fast flux. So why are these things important? Like all these lower level protocol things are extremely important to train. And there's a video of me writing on a board. I like whiteboards too. If I could modify this, you'd be whiteboard something. Oh, that's my next project. Wireshark. A lot of people don't really understand how Wireshark even works, right? You have a PCAP file. What is it? It's just a bunch of zeros and ones. That's all it really is, right? So how does Wireshark know to represent that data visually to you? Well, if you look at the top right-hand side here, we have an example, IPv4 header. Remember headers? Remember when you read about them in a book and then never cared about them again? I do. I don't care about them until I put them in a presentation. I go, oh, they're really important. I don't remember those damn things. So you have the header over here. On the left-hand side, there's an arrow pointing up. Wireshark is pointing to what I believe is the first blue line there. I'm colorblind. It's blue or purple or something. And it's pointing to where it says version 4, the actual value of which way over on the left is 0100, the binary value, right? You look down at the bottom left-hand side where the other arrow is pointing down and you see hexadecimal value of 45. And you're like, well, 45 is not 4. Well, yeah, it's taking the first 4 bits. What are 4 bits? It's a nibble. What's a nibble? How many nibbles are in a byte? There's 2, depending on the architecture, blah, 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 blah. This type of training is critical for people to understand how something as simple as Wireshark is actually visualizing what traversed over that wire, okay? So starting with the PCAP and not just saying like, this means a packet was sent back and forth, but actually talking about the packet bytes. Here's the actual bytes. Here's how they map to the header, and that's how Wireshark is then displaying the data to you. Starting at that lower level can be extremely helpful. Okay, host-based forensics. Again, I typically recommend what I call week 3 and then week 4, host-based forensics and reverse engineering. If you have a fledgling team or folks with not a lot of seed experience, I would take this out and kind of push them off. Maybe couple weeks or a month or two or something like that. Cool, thank you. So in this case, we want to talk about artifacts from your local types of operating systems. If you're a Windows shop, that's going to be Windows artifacts, starting with file system stuff like NTFS and the MFT, parsing the MFT, what's in the MFT, what the user journal file is, all that kind of stuff is very important. Registry analysis, it's Windows. So, registry for you Mac users, it'll be all your plist and their locations and things. Corporate forensics tools, right? Do you have a forensic capability like Encase? I'm sure you do, because everyone does, right? So you go over Encase and talk about how you can remotely connect to the disk and why that's important. Eric Zimmerman's tools, just Google them, you'll see why. They're phenomenal. The artifacts that you need, how to obtain them, parsing them, and what that actually tells you, just alone, you can spend an entire day on like the 10 tools on his page. And then we've got deep dive into memory analysis. Some examples of artifacts. In our classes, we spend an entire day on this poster. It's a SANS poster. It's hard to get away from SANS content because they provide a lot of it, and a lot of it's really good. So this particular poster, you just Google the damn thing. It's called Windows Forensic Analysis Poster. You're not meant to read that, by the way, if you're like, that text sucks. Duh. But if you just look at when you download it, right, you'll see all these different artifacts. And it's like, oh, the artifact lives here. And when you parse it, it tells you this. And then going through each and every one of those is what we do. If it takes a day, okay. If it takes a day and a half or 2 days, okay, whatever. Memory analysis. Take a, need the water. Take a memory image of something like Stuxnet or Black Energy. Mid-sentence water, there we go. Or something that's like driver-based, lower level rootkitty kind of malware stuff. And just run every damn command you can find in the volatility command reference. If you've never used volatility, literally Google volatility command reference. And then Google volatility example memory images. And then with one of those names, slides are available online, by the way, the example names I gave up there. And just run every freaking command. Run every single one of them. And every column, why does it exist? Why is there a PID there? Why is there a handle there? What's a mutex? How's a mutex different from a pipe? All these different little things that like core OS concepts and fundamentals, a lot of responders they're not familiar with that if they haven't worked or had that low-level forensic experience. Good example of that. In volatility, there's a command called pslist, stands for process list. There's also one called psscan. pslist will what's called walk the doubly linked list that's referred to in memory as the eproc structure. And it just goes like from one to the next, and it enumerates all the processes that are shown in memory. And it goes, these are all the processes that are running right now. There's another one called psscan, and that's because what malware can do is it can take that eproc structure and simply unlink some, or one, or whatever, of the processes from that. pslist just walks that list, so it just misses that process in memory. psscan is called psscan because it scans through the entire memory image, it looks at all different pool tags, and it looks for anything that's tagged as an eproc, and it goes like, oh, the hell, that's a process, and it's in memory. Maybe that's running in memory, and it will list them. If you see an output difference between pslist and psscan, there's a good damn reason for that. And so having your folks be aware of that is, critical, that type of analysis. That's the type of stuff you want to show them, like the differences between the individual modules and plugins. Why do they exist? I've had, I don't know how many people be like, they show the same thing. It's just different names. I'm like, okay, cool story. I'm sure. Reverse engineering. The primary thing I want to focus on here, carrier files. If you have a PDF and that PDF has JavaScript in it, or if you have what we're looking at right here, which is, I think it was an Imitet dropper. I may have been wrong on that, but downloader, excuse me. Whatever you have, the Visual Basic that's in here, if you become fully reliant on sandboxes, right? Say you use the Falcon sandbox or just VirusTotal, they've got like 4 or 5 in there. I think Tennyson is one of the ones that's default in there. I don't remember the names. Hybrid Analysis is Falcon Online. You drop it in there, something like Imitet that actually uses typically a loop where there's 5 different URLs. And if you throw it through an analysis sandbox, as soon as it hits the first one, it goes, there's your call out, and it provides it to the analyst. Meanwhile, the other 4, because you didn't manually decode all the code that's actually in there, you might not even see it. So that's if you're doing Imitet analysis, by the way, by just using sandboxes, and if you're getting 5 or 6, okay, you're probably cool. But if you're getting 1, you're probably missing indicators. Sam Bone is a teacher here, well, not here, but San Francisco City College. Phenomenal fellow. If anyone knows him here, you know how great he is. samsclass.info, okay? If you go to his website, he's got tons of curated content, like a ton. Whenever someone asks me, where's one of the best places I can go for free training? samsclass.info. It's phenomenal. All right, so he's got a malware course on here, and we spend at least half a day just going through it. So if you're like, oh, I can't get the URL, the slides are online, or just tweet me or whatever. It's available. Finally, the last week is working tickets, thank you, and working with intelligence. So intelligence, we start right off with IOCs, indicators of compromise. What is a computed indicator? What is an atomic indicator? How are they similar? How are they not similar? Why are they important? So on and so forth. So a lot of folks are not familiar with IOAs, indicators of attack. So we start talking about those and why those are important. Just seeing that PowerShell launched on a Windows machine, it means nothing. It launches on Windows all the time, right? However, if you see PowerShell launch and then you see these 4 specific processes launch in a row and you see that happening on multiple hosts in your environment and that never has, that could potentially be an indicator of attack. So we talk about all those kinds of things. And then we've got threat hunting. Wait for the banana. There it is. I know the de jure thing right now, everyone's like, threat hunting. I mean, yeah, it's extremely important. I was going to ask folks here, to shout some names out of what models you're following, but everyone knows you're following the same damn model. Everyone's following MITRE's attack framework. Anyone not following MITRE's attack framework? Using something? Can you say what it is? He's like, no. He's like, shut up, dude. Okay, all right, well. Okay, gotcha. Ow. So, anyway, threat hunting is critical, so we try teaching that right up front, using the intel that you get from your own tickets, your own alerts, and then spinning that and maybe pivoting off that to find other related attacks or threats. Something as similar or as simple as an email coming in with a given subject, and you search for that subject over the past 30 days, and you go like, oh, look, our email appliance didn't catch that campaign, right? And there could be 30, 300, whatever emails in that one. So then you go review that. Reinforcement, final concept here. On the right, it talks about quizzing. I don't like quizzes in terms of you need to get a 70% or above. I don't even want to score when it comes to quizzes. But if you look into some of the learning management systems or the LMSs, there's one that's like the king of all of them, open source, called Moodle. I'm sure folks have heard of it here. So if you grab Moodle and you make some quizzes, I recommend making it such that if you get it wrong, it just goes like, try again. And they go, okay. And they look it up and it's like, try again. Like they just try to get them to just find the damn answer, right? And just put it in. It's almost kind of part of that whole rote memorization thing that we don't want to focus too much on, but it's still good to have. Also, if you folks have ever heard of Mnemosyne, I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. I'm probably butchering it. It was the Greek god of memory or something like that. There's an open source tool called Mnemosyne, M-N-E-Syne. And if you look that up, it's really, really good for memorizing facts over time. And it's really good for these types of concepts. Oh, and then of course your tabletop. You show them a file, you say, hey, this came in. And you download it off VirusTotal or whatever, but you tell them, like, if this came in, how exactly would you respond to this? And then you kind of just go over it and hopefully they didn't suck. Okay. And that's it. I figured we wouldn't have a whole lot of time for questions because I love to talk, which you can already tell. I'm well aware. So we are using the sli.do with the code or access code BSidesSF 2019. I don't know if I can personally actually answer those, and if you folks are aware of that, but we'll try to get those answered. My Twitter, by the way, is RJ_chap. If you want to hit me up on there, I love communicating and networking on all kinds of crap. So if you have any questions about the kind of training concepts or maybe a little more detail on some individual things, just for sure let me know. And I also have 2 classes on pluralsight.com. They're, by the way, the breakfast sponsors. They're right there. So if you want to check those classes out, we have some cards for free access, so you can just check them out without having to pay anything. A little self-plug there. But that's it. I hope you enjoyed the talk, and thanks very much. Appreciate it.